Hello and welcome to Perfect Storm. I'm Robert Kecseg, your host. Nice to be back with you after having our great interview last week with Alice Linehan. This week we're going to be speaking with someone from the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Some people know them as TPPF, Texas Public Policy Foundation. We're going to have James Quintero join us, be calling in a little bit. They're also an organization that pays attention for us to what's taking place in Austin, state and local level, school districts, that type of thing. We've made the point in the show before that we want to focus on local government where people can really have an impact and kind of ignore what I heard on the radio on the way down here, more complaining about Obama. There's not a lot we can do about that. So on this show, that's what we're going to bring up. And the first segment, I usually like to talk about something that politicians seldom discuss. So today's topic is something that you probably won't hear from your mayor, that there is a 2 times a year conference called the United States Conference of Mayors. And this year there were 34 Texas mayors that participated, 200 mayors across the country altogether. And this year in June they met in Dallas. They meet each year also in Washington, D.C., and that's, of course, because they have to be more closely connected with Washington and the federal bureaucrats. Because remember, that's where all the money is, and that's where all the coercion comes from. Because if they can wave a little bit of money in front of your mayor, then your mayor can give you things, and he can take care of you, or she can take care of you and make you feel all warm and fuzzy. But of course, the other side of that is that now the federal government has more control over how we live in our cities. So we're going to talk to James about that in a little bit. Let me introduce a little bit more before we have him on about the economy, and talking about the economy and stock market, which is what I do for a living for the last 34 years at my firm, Las Colinas Capital Management. We had an incredibly poor first quarter where the economy actually contracted and actually slowed down. When the GDP, or the gross domestic product, is negative, we call that contraction in economics, which means the economy got a little bit smaller. In this case, for the March quarter, we contracted by 2.9%, which is the second lowest quarter since the whole financial crisis began. And it was just 2 weeks ago that we had on the economist from the Federal Reserve who told us that he believed that the economy is still over-levered. So I guess we shouldn't be surprised that the economy contracted in the first quarter. Well, just today we got new news on the government's first guess. When they bring out the GDP number, they do it 3 times. They do the initial kind of first guess, and then as more data comes in, they revise that initial estimate of what the actual GDP was. So today we got the first guess on June second quarter ending, and it said that it increased by 4%, 4.0. I have to smile. It's hard for me to keep a straight face, because if anybody believes that the economy grew, now this is at an annualized rate nonetheless, but a 4% rate in the second quarter, I've got some bananas for you. I mean, it just can't be so. But we will see how it turns out. Just to give you a rundown, in the first quarter, the first guess came out at a 0.1% increase. A 0.1% increase was the first guess, and then the revision went to minus 1.0%, and then the final number was minus 2.9. These are drastically changing numbers. It's like someone who had never done it before was doing it for the first time, trying to make these estimates. So that's how far off it is. So I'm not getting real excited about the 4.0. It would be great if the economy really expanded by that much. But here we are, just another government agency that doesn't do a very good job of what they're supposed to do. The same thing goes for unemployment. They keep talking about the employment figures, how many people are employed. I think they're saying we're at 6.5% of unemployed, down from a high. I think it got up to around 9, maybe 10% at the peak of the crisis. But the denominator is changing, because the denominator is saying that there aren't as many people looking for work. So if you've stopped looking for work and you're unemployed, then you're not counted. You don't count anymore.
Bob, I have a question on that point.
Yeah.
How do they determine whether a person has quit looking for work or not?
They do it in their survey. They
just call random people?
Yeah,
Are you
they
still
call
looking for a job?
people randomly, and they get a survey. And I follow a guy named Biederman. He's got an interesting way of doing it. He actually looks at sales tax numbers, sales tax collected from retail businesses, which the government collects that information, but he said they don't use the data. He says you can tell what kind of sales are going on based on the taxes they collect. All of the retail businesses collect the taxes for the government, or whatever the government might be. It's all documented.
It's almost like they want to manipulate the numbers to their own ends.
I think so. I think that's become so politicized that it probably couldn't be more political than the way it is now. Mm-hmm. But let me see, one more thing. Oh, I was going to make some comment. There's been a lot going on about corporations taking advantage of lower tax rates for their corporation overseas. So in my business, I follow companies. I follow individual companies so I can follow their stock, or I can follow their business so I can better understand how their stock should perform. So in doing this, I listen to a lot of quarterly conference calls. It's become ordinary and customary that public companies do a quarterly conference call to report their results. They report the results in press releases, and then they have conference calls for analysts like me to entertain questions that we might have. Well, I was listening to a company. It's a very large company. They do business all around the world because what they do is they build offshore drilling platforms for companies that want to use them to drill for oil in the water. And just to give you an idea, the technology has advanced so tremendously that they can now drill in 10,000 feet of water. That's 2 miles deep of water. So this floats just like a vessel, just like a ship. In fact, some of them they call them drill ships. They can actually drill 2 wells off of one ship. And just to give you an idea, what choice does this company have but to deal with customers from any country in the world? They don't, in other words, I think people like them are being condemned because a lot of their earnings are in foreign countries because they're doing a lot of work for Brazil. Brazil's doing a lot of offshore drilling off of Rio de Janeiro and that whole area. It's very deep water there, kind of towards the limit of the technology. And so that's a customer of theirs. So if that's where your customer is, just think about that. How many corporations out there are being condemned for doing business overseas, for making profits overseas? And the reason why I brought this up is because in the course of the conference call, the management of the company explained that they would like to be able to bring more money back into the United States because they would like to invest it here in the United States. But the tax laws are so onerous that they're trying to bring it in at the lowest cost. And that seems to be a difficult thing. I just heard Obama make some comment about companies establishing business overseas and they're as if they're somehow circumventing the United States tax system. Many of these companies can't afford to not do this business.
Right. I just pulled up a quote by Thomas Jefferson. He says, "Peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none." So it's he's for the free market, even amongst nations.
Yeah, he didn't even like the government to have alliances with certain countries to favor one over the other. That was a very big thing of his, and that was very popular too amongst other people in those days.
I think we have our speaker on.
We have our caller.
Yes, sir. James Quintero from Texas Public Policy Foundation.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, today we're going to talk about this U.S. Conference of Mayors specifically, and how this applies to us as constituents in local government. And so we have James Quintero, who's joining us from his organization called the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And I think James said he's been with them over 5 years. And James, are you there?
Hey, Robert, good to be on.
Great, thanks for spending some time with us. I was actually chuckling to myself earlier when we first started the show a few minutes ago to kind of introduce the idea that it isn't once a year but twice a year the mayors get together with this conference, once in D.C. each year, and then once a year in a different city, in a rotating cities. And of course, this June it was here in Dallas, Texas. And thanks to your write-up and the people at your organization, Texas for Public Policy Foundation, I learned that there were 34 Texas cities represented and about 200 cities nationwide, I guess. So what was the first thing that struck you about this, James, when you were kind of covering this?
To be honest, the fact that they would be so bold enough to bring their liberal agenda to a thriving metropolitan in a red state like Texas. You know, we have probably some of the best conservative policies, at least on a state level here in the great state of Texas. You know, our legislature has largely adopted the premise that low taxes and limited government lead to prosperity. And I think you see that when you compare Texas to other states, we knock it out of the park when it comes to jobs, people, and income. And so now there's obviously a lot of room for reform at the local level, and I think the federal government also sees that, and they're exploiting somewhat of a weakness here in Texas, in that our local officials are sometimes a little bit more susceptible to progressive policies than we have at the state level. And so we had our 82nd, they had their 82nd U.S. Conference of Mayors in Dallas, Texas, and it was really quite an event. You had mayors from all of your major metropolitans in Texas, over 30, attend a conference where they discussed a lot of really radical left-wing agenda items, and were able to actually pass quite a few resolutions without any opposition. You would think that local officials from a state like Texas would at least voice their concerns about a lot of the stuff that they were talking about, but I watched the proceedings on video, and not a peep was to be heard. So let's talk about some of the things that our mayors and our local officials were exposed to and evidently supported. Without contradiction. So looking through their agenda items, they were educated on investing in better bicycling and economic development strategy to keep cities moving. We have building support for federal action on immigration. We have towards a new urban order, common platforms and common standards for cities. And then, of course, the one that really got our attention was the green agenda, and supporting resolutions calling for federal action on climate change, something that, at least in our minds, is still up for debate.
Let me interrupt you for a second. The first thing that jumped out at me, James, was how offensive this would be for me if I were a mayor and I was sitting in the room and this stuff was being presented to me, because the one that you mentioned we can talk about a little bit, towards a new urban order, common platforms and common standards for cities. The first thing I think of is, well, who in Texas wants to be like California? You said that you grew up in Northern California. I grew up in suburban L.A., and so I have a personal experience with growing up in California. I'm not saying there was anything particularly wrong with it, but I have lived in Texas for 34 years, and I know that people that are native to Texas or people that have been in Texas for a long time would rather be here than be in California. And to say that we would have common standards for cities when people are going to vote for their city councilmen and their mayors and so forth, to me is really offensive to be trying to shove down mayors' throats that we're going to all become alike. It's just the complete opposite of what this country is all about.
I totally agree, and I think it actually goes to, it shouldn't surprise anybody that the federal government has a mentality when it comes to public policy that one size fits all, right? They commonly abuse that standard. And so it's really not surprising to me that they're trying to infiltrate those one-size-fits-all standards at the local level. I think most people would actually be surprised at the level of success that they've had. But you're right on in that, each city and each community is different. And rather than try and adopt these one-size-fits-all standards, we should be embracing our diversity and operating under the circumstances that our community wants, not what DC wants or not what some big conglomeration of states wants. It's really a matter of what suits and what's best suited for the local community itself.
Yeah, I was going to say, I literally asked my wife, who works with me in my business, to print this off when I first read your article, and I saw that there was this link, and so I had her print this off, and then next thing we knew that the printer was going, and it got to 62 pages, and we finally stopped it. Folks, I'm telling you, many of your mayors, whether it would be Arlington or where I used to live in Irving, I know our mayor from Irving was there, Beth Van Dyne. I think it was for 30,000 population or more. Literally has over 60 pages of resolutions. 60 pages of resolutions plus. I mean, I stopped it at 62 pages, James. Here's one that I pulled out. This is on page 55. I have to laugh at this. Just think, in this time right now, recognizing U.S. leadership in protecting refugees and celebrating the contributions of refugees to their communities in the U.S. So I thought, well, if we go by that, we can be just like the Chinese, except we will immigrate 1 billion people here on top of the 300 or 400 million that we have and become a 1.4 billion population like the Chinese. At least the Chinese birthed most of theirs. And it says to have World Refugee Day is observed on the 20th of June each year, whereas more than 45 million people around the world have been forced to flee their homes and their countries due to persecution, conflict, and violence, whereas refugees are persons in need of protection because they have been persecuted for their political opinion, religious belief, race, nationality. It reminds me of these kids, they keep saying these children, when many of them are teenagers, are coming over here saying that they're fleeing gangs. Well, we've got plenty of gangs for them to join. I mean, if anybody thinks that America doesn't have plenty of gangs, ask the people in Chicago, Detroit, Dallas, Houston, Los Angeles, you name it. Again, growing up out in California, you don't have to go too far into East LA to find a lot of gangs.
And Bob, let me just interject something here. We did the show with Bill Zedler yesterday, and we covered immigration. One of the points that we made was that inside these internment camps, detention centers, whatever they are, where these so-called kids, quote unquote, are coming, the gangs are using the phone bank of the Red Cross to recruit gang members here in the United States.
Wow. It just doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. Well, like I say, James, and then the other one, investing in better bicycling. I'll tell you, I'm doing this recording here through the auspices of the Arlington Tea Party, through the Lone Star Tea Party website, for all of those people in the local area that like what we're doing here. I know we're very connected to Arlington, and I can tell you, James, that the Arlington Tea Party and a lot of activists in the area have been very frustrated by Arlington Mayor Cluck and his push for these kind of agenda items where they've taken out entire lanes of traffic on busy streets for bike lanes. And I don't know where all these bicyclists are, but I know a lot of people have cars. It's mind-boggling to me that you would come up with such a crazy idea.
Yeah, and I actually think that speaks to a large agenda item that the left is pushing, right? they always talk about density and trying to get people to move into smaller, more confined spaces where they can, walk around and shop and eat all within a 1 mile radius. But, as you and I probably know, that's just not how Texans operate, right? We like big open spaces. We like to drive our cars, and unfortunately, that type of mentality really conflicts with what the left wants here in Texas.
Yeah.
And it, despite I think widespread public opposition, they are a persistent group, and they're chasing the ideas of bike lanes and commuter rail and streetcars, and you see that actually all throughout the state.
Yeah.
Now, to our credit, I think conservatives are doing a better job of not only being vocal in our opposition, but coming out with intelligent messages about how a lot of these things are just wasteful spending and contribute to the growth of government needlessly.
Well, and the other aspect of it is, too, that I feel offended, not just on the specific items, but to think that local government leaders, as we call them mayors, would be getting together with this built agenda that was built by somebody else for this specific purpose. And when they're going to D.C., we know it was built somewhere in D.C., really with the idea that they can get more control of our cities. When we're paying and we're voting for people to represent us at the local level, and like many people like Jefferson said, government closer to the people is more where the people have more control, and the further government gets away from the people, we have less control. Well, we sure showed that in the election, in the primary election in Texas for state reps and state senators, at least here in the Metroplex where I'm more familiar, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, than we have in changing control of U.S. congressmen and U.S. senators. Much more difficult to remove from office. So same thing with city councilmen on cities. To think that they would want to federalize our cities. And I think a lot of it is naivete. Don't you, James? You think a lot of the mayors are kind of naive as to what's taking place?
Oh, goodness, yes. And you're absolutely right. This is a policy agenda that's being driven from Washington, D.C., down to our local communities, through our local officials who, you're right on target, I think a lot of times are naive to the political realities or simply don't have a good sense of what the implications of a lot of these policies are and are kind of just along for the ride. And it's on us, in particular, conservatives and my colleagues around here, to really do a better job of educating local officials as to, what the implications are for a lot of these things, like bicycles. If we implement bike lanes all around town and we take away roadways, well, what does that mean for our transportation system? Well, it's probably going to mean more congestion. Yeah. It's probably going to mean more accidents. It's really on us to do a better job of educating. But absolutely, right now, as the situation exists, there is a definite policy agenda being pushed by D.C. onto our local officials.
I made a comment to our mayor in Irving, Beth Van Dyne, and the city council when she had a few town halls. When she took over in the very beginning of her first term, she's up for re-election, or just up for re-election now, and succeeded in keeping her position. I made the point to the city council at a public forum, this town hall format, that the reason why I am so against things like all of this has to do with all the United Nations, the Agenda 21 stuff, and all this control, is that I don't want anybody from out of the city that I live in telling me how we should allocate money, how we should do anything with our city. You need to be in the city. I don't want to hear from somebody in Austin or Chicago or D.C. or Indonesia on how we're going to handle land in the city of Irving. And I think that's how it should be. They're not paying any taxes here. Isn't that right, James?
Oh, yes. And to speak to your concern, which I think is well-founded, To speak to that, so during the mayor's conference, while they were voting on this resolution, they passed one that says this: "Be it further resolved that the nation's mayors call on the administration to give high priority to the pursuit of international agreements to address global climate change and GHG emission reductions." So, essentially, what you have is a non-binding resolution from this mayor's council to the administration, asking them to sign on to these international agreements to address climate change. And so you're right on in that, we're asking for international involvement in the affairs of the city of Irving, or the city of Dallas, or whatever other region.
Sure.
And this is really just beyond the scope when it comes to what local Texans and taxpayers want their local officials to do.
Yeah, and the other thing is I guess they feel that if they say climate change often enough that maybe they'll be right. And as you wrote in your article, you don't really want to address the climate change thing, whether it's right or wrong. But it does bother me that any agency of the government is out there professing really much more of a philosophy, much more of an experiment than anything that's really proven. So I'll switch it over to minimum wage, because you also cited this silliness, asking them to go on board. It says addressing income inequality, raising the minimum wage. The first thing that I would argue on that is, tell me, does anyone in the audience know what the minimum wage offer is when someone goes to work at a Del Taco? Do they know what the minimum wage is when they go to work at a gym as a new employee? Do you know what the minimum wage is when somebody goes to work at a Target store? Do you know what the minimum wage is? Because they're all different. They're all different. The first job that I had, 1970, I know that puts me back some now. I can say I'm an older guy. But 1970, the minimum wage was, I looked it up, was about $1.65. That was a federal minimum wage. I started at that employment in a warehouse, pushing a hand dolly, moving stuff around in a warehouse all day. And I started my job at $2 an hour in 1970. And but the $2 an hour was based on what that particular employer knew it would take to get somebody to work there. Because when my sons got their first job, I have two sons, they're grown now, grown men now, but when they got their job at, say, 15 or 16 years old, I knew of a place where they could work in a warehouse. It was a stock that I was involved in the stock market. And I knew the owner of the business. They made ceiling fans. And their starting wage there was $9 an hour. And, of course, that was about, let's see, what would it be? It'd be about 15 years ago, about 15, 16 years ago. So we're talking about 1998, 1999, somewhere around in there is when they had their very first job in the summer as a teenager. And certainly the $9 was more than the minimum wage at the time. I think it was $6 something at the time. So I asked the owner then, at that point in time, I said, how did you arrive at $9? I bet you most of the mayors couldn't answer this question, James. His answer was, well, we used to be able to do the work on the loading dock where they were working for about $8, and then we moved it up to $8.50, and then we moved it up to $9, mainly because they needed to have a certain quality person come to work, and like he says, come to work Monday through Friday every week. Because he found that when you're too low for that particular job, you won't get someone they'll come on Friday and get their check and you'll never see them again. He told me that you'll never see them again. He contacted, someone says, well, if you need people, you ought to contact the Texas Workforce Commission. So he had one of his people contact them. They said, how many do you need? He said, send out 30. They sent out 30 people to do warehouse work. At the end of the week, he had one person left.
Wow.
They had one person that they couldn't find because they had a punch clock. They punched in. He never punched out. So they knew this person was missing. You know what the guy did? He went into the warehouse. He found a box. He crawled into the box and went to sleep and slept there all day, all the way to where the day was over, and they were trying to find this guy because they needed to lock up. This is a big warehouse. It's like over 100,000 square foot warehouse, right? And so that's the difference, folks. That's why he has a minimum wage at that level. And so he knows from his own business. I'm saying these mayors don't know. The bureaucrats in Washington are the last to know because there's all different wages. And the reason why I say this, James, because I don't hear anybody make the argument that there are lots of minimum wages. They're different depending on the business. And stuff like this, for them to put out stuff like this is just plain dumb. Just plain dumbness. I just can't get over it. Care to comment?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I think what you just described is a perfect illustration of the free market in action, right?
Sure.
I mean, there are all businesses around the state have all varying degrees of needs and abilities to compensate, which is why a one size fits all policy like the minimum wage doesn't work. It discounts those those lower income jobs, and it makes it harder for businesses to hire the help they need at the wage that they're willing to pay.
Yep.
So, if you look at things like youth unemployment, much higher than regular unemployment, and one of the leading causes of that is the minimum wage. It just doesn't make sense for employers to hire employees that they might otherwise would at the current federal minimum wage. And so, I think that's absolutely on track.
I was going to say, I found something else in here. This is on page 13 of these resolutions. It says, now therefore be it resolved that the U.S. Conference of Mayors supports a movement committed to engaging every community, and particularly parents and caregivers, in daily brain-building moments with their children, while highlighting the ease and developmental importance supported by the latest scientific research of these conversational moments between adult and child. I mean, I can't believe, what this shows me is that there's no end to the attempt to micromanage a society. And, for me, I had on, 2 weeks ago, we had on a economist that's retired now from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, and we talked mainly about the affordable housing. And to me, when you think about the government, the Congress implemented this program and caused one of the greatest financial crises in the history of the United States, and that all was birthed from them deciding in Congress that we needed to have 70% of households own their own home. That just this one idea, was their great idea. And it's the same thing here. You're going to come up with all these great ideas that you think are so great. And then last week we had on Alice Linehan, who specializes, she does a show here also, James, and concentrates on education. And the reason why I bring it up is because we should talk about each other's shows. So if people hear me and they hear about that, they may be interested in hearing her show, where she kind of focuses on education, particularly here in Texas, and of course this whole thing of Common Core and all that problem. But just to think of how involved has the federal government been in education, and what a mess it has become since 1975, the year that I graduated college. It's just astounding to me that the government can create so many different programs that have failed miserably, and yet you come back with more. I mean, the audacity to come out with, after affordable housing was such an abomination causing this financial crisis, that you actually have the nerve to call it affordable health care.
The solution is the problem.
To come out, it's like it wasn't Thomas Sowell, it was Walter Williams, the economist from George Mason, said. He said, isn't it amazing that they actually had the nerve to call it affordable health care after affordable housing failed so miserably? you'd think you'd come up with a different name. It's amazing to me. Yeah, there was one other one here too. I saw it about the VA. They actually had something about veterans being taken care of and having access to quality health care. Here it is. It's page 10. This is the title of these resolutions: Ensuring Veterans' Access to Quality Health Care. So what are you doing? Are you telling us that your federal program has already failed? So now we're going to talk to the mayors about how the mayors are going to somehow make this federal program better? I mean, I can't imagine why you would expose the silliness of this in writing after this whole thing blew up, because this was a June meeting, right, James? So the VA story was already out there, wasn't it?
Yeah, this would have been at the end of June. Yeah.
Did they say that did they have some sort of committees of mayors that come up with all these great ideas?
That's a good question. I'm just beginning to delve into the structure of the U.S. Conference of Mayors.
Mm-hmm.
It's in fact, kind of speaking of that, we've been digging into what it is exactly that we're paying as local taxpayers to support this organization. Because of course, the travel and the food and all the expenses, well, those aren't free, and those certainly aren't paid out of the personal pockets of our mayors and local officials. And so when I kind of stumbled on this organization here recently, we sent open records requests to every single mayor's office who was listed as a participating mayor. And good heavens, it was quite an eye-opening adventure. So we have a list that's probably about 85-90% complete. We're still missing a few responses from some of our mayors. But what we wanted to know was, okay, mayors, what are you guys spending in terms of travel and food to get to the conference in Dallas, as well as hotel accommodations? And then are there any annual dues associated with being a part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors? And here's what we found. So the mayors were staying at the Omni Hotel in Dallas at a cost of about $199 a night. So, I found it a little ironic that they were discussing intently the problems of income inequality while staying at one of the ritzier hotels in Dallas, but that's probably my own personal amusement. So, in addition to that, we found that some cities, like the city of Dallas, paid an annual contribution to the U.S. Conference of Mayors in excess of $40,000 a year. Now, that's not for every city. Every city, it appears from the information that we've gathered, the annual contribution depends likely on population size and ability to pay the dues. But in the city of Irving, we found that annual dues to the group were in excess of $12,000. Here in my own city of Austin, we found that our city taxpayers were supporting annual dues of more than $26,000. So you have major metropolitans all around the state paying tens of thousands of dollars on an annual basis to be lobbied by a federal group out in D.C. on these left-wing policies.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And then, of course, we asked, well, okay, what does it take to get there? And, we found on average cities around the state were paying probably close in between $1,000 to $4,000 worth of expenses to get all of their local officials out there situated and propagandized to. So, it's. And of course, this is just for the Dallas meeting. I'm sure that we're still trying to track down the expenses for their DC meeting. But so we're local taxpayers are really getting a double whammy here. Not only are their local officials being exposed to these radical progressive policy agenda items, and being propagandized to, but they're also having to support getting their mayors and their local officials there to the meeting. And so it's really a double whammy for Texans.
Yeah, there's a movement on too that I've seen. The new mayor of New York, who I've read about, is a pretty radical guy. De Blasio, I guess, is an avowed Marxist in his history, and I think some people have done a good job of documenting that. That's why I said it. As Mark Levin would say, yes, I said it. I'm Marxist. But they have a support for the home program on page 21 of their resolutions, whereas the Home Investment Partnerships, HOME, H-O-M-E, program has been vital for housing low-income families for more than 20 years. Over 600 local and state governments receive home funds. Now, this gets to the point that if one of the mayors I was speaking to, they would remind me that, the amount of money that they spent to be part of this organization is just a fraction of what the city got back from the federal government. And that's where this whole thing began. I can tell you from just going to their website, James, that it's pretty evident that in the 1930s, during the Depression, I think Detroit and some other places were reaching out saying, help us, all these people in these food lines. And so they started getting the mayors together, then they started getting together with the federal government, and they had started this coercive policy where, we come and join together with you and hold hands and come up with all these great ideas, and then we get some federal money. So isn't that what the mayors are going to tell people, that, look at the federal money that we got from becoming familiar with, and, raising my hand and say, yeah, I'm all for this, give me some money. It's really what they're after.
Absolutely. The left does such a great job of promoting the idea, both at the state and the local level, that there's this free federal money out there that everybody should run and chase. And of course, it's not free. Federal tax dollars come from somewhere, right? They come from you and I. But beyond that, when state and local governments chase those free federal dollars, well, most of the time, if not all the time, there are requirements that they must meet, like matching requirements. So in order to get $10 of free federal money, you have to pay $1. And so that, of course, contributes to higher taxes and more spending at the local level. In some instances, they require you to modify your program. So back when the stimulus package was passed, and Texas was to be a recipient of, I believe it was $555 million of free federal stimulus for unemployment. That was the carrot. The stick was that they needed to modify their program and adjust their eligibility criteria so that more people could get on the unemployment program. And of course, that was one of the famous instances in which a state turned down a request.
Yeah.
And conservatives were, of course, castigated for the fact that they turned down more than $500 million of free federal money. But of course, again, that required changes in perpetuity to the state's unemployment program. So,
yeah.
There's always another side to the coin of the free federal dollars.
Well, and it's the same thing now. I mean, when we talked with Alice Linehan last week about the education impact, look at the impact of all of these federal programs on the education system. I was talking to her about the aggravation that I heard from teachers in Irving ISD about the constant changes in the curriculum for all these different programs. It just drives them crazy and makes their job so much more difficult to do. The massive amount of paperwork they have to deal with, the bureaucracy just descends on these teachers, and they spend tons and tons of time. I was going to say, in this particular case, when I did a little bit of review to try to get myself familiar with this organization and try to find its history, and I found out about this beginning in the Depression, it amazes me that the fact that they reached out during the Depression and reached out to the federal government, in those days the federal government was a much smaller part of the economy. Now the federal government has tons and tons of programs, much more bigger part of the economy overall together. Nothing like that. But we still have this program for cities to be able to get basically coerced into more and more programs. It says in their, right off their website, that in the past the conference has taken stances against Ronald Reagan's 1983 budget. It must have been that there wasn't as much money there in the 83 budget as what they had planned on, so therefore they were against it. And it's back to that silliness that you were talking about, that I've certainly said at an Irving City Council meeting more than once, as to where do you think this money comes from? Where do you think this federal money comes from? It's just ludicrous to sit there and think, well, and some people say, well, we're going to get ours. We're going to get ours because if we don't take it, somebody else will. Well, then we'll just go bankrupt, and we'll just bankrupt the country just like we did with all the banks. I was going to add, too, I don't know if you delved into this yet, but they mentioned that on the June 11, 2007, the conference leadership approved the annual 10-point platform called for strong cities, strong families for a strong America. It's those kind of platitudes that it just irks me when they're treating us like children. That if we don't have this little saying and this little slogan, then we just won't have a strong America. You have to buy into the socialism in order to have a strong America.
The left is great at creating this superficial facade that that sounds great on the surface, but holy moly, you get past the surface and things are just a mess. So it doesn't surprise me that they would put out something like that.
Let's see, what else do we have? Well, there was the EPA. They got into bed with the EPA. Be it resolved that the U.S. Conference of Mayors calls on the EPA, that the mayors are calling on the EPA to provide flexibility in its development of CAA standards. What's CAA? Climate, some kind of climate acronym, standards for existing utility generating. There's another point in here where it was controlling business, monitoring. Here it is. This is over in Jess Field's piece. It says mayors are also explicitly called upon the federal government to mandate. Now, can you believe this, folks, that mayors would call on the federal government to mandate not only monitoring of private energy use, but also government-mandated changes in how these private entities use energy and how much.
Which is really astounding. So, in the resolution that we read from earlier, basically the group, which was supported by all mayors, again, no mayors dissented, at least publicly. All mayors basically called for a comprehensive national plan on how to deal with this climate change agenda, and contained within the context of this plan is an effort to try and basically create standards under which private energy use, so you and your home, could be dictated to essentially by your city government, who would then report to a more probably the national government, if not the state. Yeah. And so they're basically creating these layers of government which ultimately funnel down onto the individual and allow them greater access and control to your private energy usage. I think Texans would be absolutely flabbergasted by what's going on in these conferences and what their local officials are signing up for.
Sure. Now, let me just ask you this. Of course, they probably did this by voice vote, so nobody was really on the record.
Of course.
Yeah. And the other thing is, the federal government is doing by waiving money in these mayors' faces and buying their allegiance. That's the other thing is here. This is not a free will decision. They're saying, look, I can provide you with this money if you sign on to these things. So then they become an enforcer of federal policies on individual cities for all of this kind of nonsense about how much energy you're using and what you're using it for and everything else. That's the purpose of, I guess, the smart meters and all this other kind of stuff. You know, they have these great names: smart growth, smart buildings, smart meters, and it's all about absolute control of people's lives. Just the complete opposite of what America has always been. Complete opposite. Yeah, I was just going to read the next line. When a municipality is empowered to impose restrictive sustainability laws on private businesses for the sake of the green agenda, even limiting how much energy they're allowed to use, property rights are out the window. And that's exactly what we were talking about in the beginning, that really what this gets down to is restricting individual property rights. And that's the real power behind this. That's the real that clobbers us over the head. To me, it's the most vile part of it. Care to comment?
I think you're absolutely right. You know, when you get down to the crux of the issue, it's all about property rights, and you know, the federal government's willingness through local officials to try and control that and try and get power over that. It's sinister, if you ask me. But,
it is sinister. And, you know, just to relate to that, in my securities business as a securities broker, we just had our little regulator come by and go through, and they could hardly find anything. And I was trying to tell the founder of the company that being in the Air Force for 6 years, I learned that in a bureaucracy, when the, quote, inspector, the IG, or whoever it is, regulator comes out to regulate you, they have to find something. They have to write something down. They can't go back to their boss and say, well, that brokerage firm didn't have anything. Are you kidding me? You get back out there and find something. So this young lady, she found something and says there wasn't proper supervisory, you know, some commentary about that this website wasn't adequately supervised. And again, I'm always trying to tell the owner that we write our own supervisory things. And I said, the more you write in there, the more you obligate yourself to. It's the same thing here. The mayor's obligating themselves to all sorts of nitnoy rules and ambitions of a central government in your local citizens, and becoming part and parcel of this overlord is just the complete opposite of why this country is so successful. You know, I always say, you know, we didn't get to have the highest per capita income in the world, a $15-16 trillion GDP. You know, the next I always tell people, they don't realize this, the next greatest economy in size is now it's China is in the number 2 spot at about 8 trillion. And that's after they came out of the, you know, their whatever 16th, 17th, 18th century, where they've been living for all this time under communist central plan rule. And you know, now we're regressing, going the other direction. We're trying to catch up with Europe. That's what it seems like to me, James.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on. It, you know, it's a little bit disheartening to see the direction we've gone in the last few years, but at least here in Texas, I think there's an opportunity to advance the conservative cause. You know, with regard to this issue, I think just by shining a light on it, we've been able to do at least a little bit of good. You know, I have a few friends in office, and we've kind of shamed them privately into you know, possibly reconsidering their involvement with the U.S. Conference of Mayors.
Yeah.
And I think as we begin to push a little harder and make this more of an issue in the public eye, and really show people that, you know, you guys are Texans are financially supporting these mayors' exposure to these radical progressive ideas which are filtering back down to your communities and you're suffering under. I think that we can begin to build momentum and make the case that things need to change. And so, you know, I'm hopeful about the situation, at least here in Texas.
Yeah, we have a few minutes left, so let me make sure I don't overlook this. We're speaking with James Quintero. We're about to wrap up the show, but I wanted to say James has been for over 5 years with the Texas Public Policy Foundation in Austin, Texas. James, why don't you give us a minute and a half or so on on the different functions of and the different kind of educational aspects of what your organization tries to do in the state.
Sure. So Texas Public Policy Foundation is the one of the largest state-based free market think tanks in the nation, and really our efforts have, for up until about a year ago, have been focused on making state policy more conservative-leaning. And so we've helped legislators craft good policy, which helps to limit the growth of government, helps to keep spending low, helps to lower taxes. About a year ago, we kind of took a look around and said, well, by and large, the legislature has done a fairly decent job of keeping and implementing conservative policy, but the local governments have not.
Right.
In fact, if you look at your cities, your counties, your school districts, and your special districts, there are a wide array of problems all across the state. Be it spending, debt, taxes, pensions, even basic things like transparency, which you think everybody's on board with transparency. Well, no, actually, a lot of your local governments don't even have websites.
Yeah.
And so we took a look around at the local government situation here in Texas, and we said, okay, well, this is clearly the next frontier for advancing the conservative cause, because if we don't get our local government situation under control, then it won't matter how good we're doing at the state legislative level. We'll be brought under. And so in July of last year, we opened up shop, and we broke ground, so to speak, and a few months later, we brought on my colleague Jeff Fields, who's a former College Station city councilman, and together we've kind of been introducing ourselves and helping city councilmen, county commissioners, school board members really dig into the public policy issues affecting their communities, and helping to develop conservative solutions and conservative alternatives, as opposed to, hey, let's just grow government, let's just spend more, we'll just go and raise property taxes. And so, come to find out, Texas is a pretty big state, and it's got a lot of local governments and got a lot of local government issues and problems. And so we definitely have our hands full, but it's been so exciting to get out there and really dig into an area which, as far as I can tell, really didn't have a lot of conservative options and conservative alternatives, and so it's been exciting to see the thirst and the hunger out there for these type of ideas, and we're very blessed to be where we're at right now.
Well, thanks, James. That's a great wrap up, and I'm going to do my best to inform people about organizations like yours. This is Texas Public Policy Foundation. This has been James Quintero that we've been speaking with. They have a very robust organization in Austin. They're trying to also inform people and educate people around the state. There's going to be a huge budget battle in the upcoming session, of which Texas Public Policy Foundation is right there at the ground floor of. I know that. I saw their work from before about the big debate about how much increase in spending actually took place. I did listen to a YouTube from your colleague, I think Bill Peacock, before I came today, and saw a little bit about that to get myself familiar. So we'll certainly have some more people on, have you back again, James, and maybe some other folks from your organization. And I'm going to work to keep our people informed who view us. And this is WBTM, We Become the Media TV. We'll send you a link so that you can pass it around and spread the word of our interview today. James, thanks so much. James, thank you so much for spending the time with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm glad to be helping y'all out. Y'all are doing a fantastic job.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Well, folks, we're going to wrap it up for Perfect Storm this week. I hope you enjoyed it, visiting with James Quintero from Texas Public Policy Foundation. We're going to reach out to several other organizations that I've become familiar with that are doing similar work in different areas. Of course, there's the Texas Right to Life immediately comes to mind. There's the Young Conservatives group. I want to reach out to some young people and hear from them. So we're going to try to add those tidbits because these are people who are working in the state of Texas. They're working at more of the local level where we can have an impact. So here at WBTM, We Become the Media can try to spread that word out through the internet, through the means of TV and audio and video. So when you see this, I guess we can go